Hi everyone, I'm Jake. Today we're diving into a chilling and fascinating topic, the 10 most evil female cases in U.S. history. These cases shocked the nation, challenged our understanding of criminal behavior, and continue to captivate true crime fans to this day. Make sure to watch until the end, and if you enjoy these dark true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. Case 1. Margaret Ann Allen. Margaret Ann Allen's story is one that shocks and captivates, not because of the notoriety she sought, but because of how an ordinary life spiraled into tragedy. Born on January 23, 1966 in Titusville, Florida, Allen's early life was marked by instability and hardship. Growing up in a neighborhood known for crime and drug activity, she faced a father who was frequently absent and siblings who eventually ended up behind bars. Her childhood was far from idyllic, but it was filled with hopes and dreams like any other child. Margaret's life seemed ordinary at first. She became a mother and experienced the joy of holding her newborns, Alvinia and Carlos, in 1989. These moments, captured in local newspapers, showed a young mother proud of her children and optimistic about the future. Yet, beneath the surface, a pattern of troubling behavior was forming, foreshadowing a life that would intersect with the darker side of human nature. As she grew, Allen encountered violence in her personal relationships, including being physically assaulted by boyfriends and threatened in her own home. These experiences left marks on her psyche, shaping a person who could display both extreme kindness and alarming aggression. She worked various jobs, including janitorial services, but her life was consistently intertwined with brushes with the law. Records show multiple arrests, ranging from minor drug offenses to aggravated battery and possession of firearms, reflecting a history of choices that increasingly isolated her from the community around her. Despite this, family members described moments of genuine care and generosity. One acquaintance, Quentin Allen, who would later play a role in the events that shocked Brevard County, spoke of her protecting and helping those around her, illustrating the complexity of her character. However, this duality would soon culminate in a criminal case that would make her one of the most infamous women on Florida's death row. On February 8, 2005, Wenda Wright, a 39-year-old friend and housekeeper of Allen, was reported missing. Investigators quickly discovered that what appeared to be a disappearance was, in fact, a horrific crime. Margaret Allen, suspecting Wright of taking $2,000 from her purse, allegedly confronted her over the missing money. According to police records, the confrontation escalated dramatically. Allen reportedly subjected Wright to hours of physical and psychological intimidation, during which chemicals and cleaning solutions were used to force compliance. This continued until Wright lost consciousness, after which Allen, with assistance from her nephew Quentin Allen and roommate James Martin, attempted to dispose of her body in a shallow grave near State Road 46 in North Brevard. Witness testimonies and police documentation revealed the intense fear experienced by Wright during the ordeal, painting a chilling picture of a moment that would define Allen's future. Quentin Allen later testified that he was instructed to restrain Wright while his aunt executed the violent actions. Martin, too, played a role in the aftermath, helping transport and bury the body. Both men eventually faced legal consequences for their involvement, receiving reduced sentences in exchange for cooperation against Margaret. The trial, which began years later, was filled with emotional testimonies, graphic evidence, and a meticulous examination of Allen's life and the events leading to Wright's death. Prosecutors argued that the premeditation was evident, pointing to the planning and execution of actions that culminated in Wright's demise. The defense attempted to present mitigating factors, including evidence of brain injury and trauma from Allen's past, suggesting that these may have affected her judgment and emotional control. Despite these arguments, the jury found Margaret Allen guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping, unanimously recommending the maximum penalty. On May 19, 2011, Allen was officially sentenced to death, becoming the third woman on Florida's death row at the time. Her case was particularly notable due to the rarity of female death row inmates and the circumstances surrounding the crime. Experts pointed out that while women commit fewer murders, those who do often have complicated personal histories that intertwine with the criminal justice system in unique ways. Allen's story exemplifies this, blending elements of family dysfunction, neighborhood violence, and personal choice into a single tragic narrative. Family members provided context for the environment in which she grew up. Her mother, Alvinia Strozier, worked in assembly at a local space systems plant, while Allen and her siblings were exposed to crime and drug use from a young age. Relatives spoke of Allen's desire for paternal guidance, a wish unmet due to her father's frequent absences and legal troubles. This environment shaped a life in which poor choices became normalized and opportunities for intervention were limited. During the trial, further insights into Allen's behavior were revealed. Medical examiners detailed injuries consistent with a violent struggle, while testimonies illustrated the intense emotional and physical control Allen exerted over Wright during their confrontation. The prosecution emphasized that these actions were deliberate, aimed at punishing Wright for a perceived theft. Meanwhile, the defense highlighted the potential influence of Allen's neurological condition, prior trauma, and personal hardships, suggesting a more nuanced understanding of her actions. The courtroom drama extended beyond the defendant herself. Family members of both Allen and Wright were present, offering an emotional backdrop to the proceedings. Wright's common-law husband, Johnny Dublin, expressed both grief and an astonishing willingness to forgive, stating that while he was angry, he did not seek retribution. These human elements underscored the tragedy of the case, showing that the consequences of crime ripple far beyond the immediate victims. Quentin Allen and James Martin, whose involvement was crucial to understanding the events, also faced scrutiny. Quentin's testimony was pivotal in establishing the sequence of events, while both men's plea agreements highlighted the legal strategies often employed in complex cases involving multiple participants. Their cooperation provided prosecutors with crucial evidence, ultimately leading to Margaret Allen's conviction. Beyond the courtroom, Allen's case raised broader questions about crime, punishment, and the social factors contributing to violent behavior. Experts on death penalty trends noted the rarity of female executions and the legal system's cautious approach to such cases. In Florida, only 2 women had been executed in the previous century, emphasizing the exceptional nature of Allen's sentence. Analysts also discussed the role of environmental and familial influences, showing that criminal behavior often emerges from a combination of personal trauma, exposure to violence, and limited access to support systems. In her personal statements during hearings, Allen maintained her innocence regarding intent, expressing remorse yet contesting the severity of the punishment. She pleaded for a life sentence, highlighting the complex interplay between accountability, rehabilitation, and societal judgment. Witnesses noted her emotional display, describing sobbing and visible distress during proceedings. Meanwhile, the ongoing challenges faced by her children and siblings, many of whom were involved in criminal activities, illustrated a continuing cycle of hardship. Today, Margaret Allen remains a significant figure in discussions of female criminality and the application of capital punishment. Her case serves as a cautionary tale about how personal history, environment, and choices intersect to create devastating outcomes. It also sheds light on the intricacies of the justice system, the role of plea agreements, and the weight of juror decisions in determining life and death sentences. While the details of the crime are sobering, they also highlight the resilience of those affected, from Wright's surviving family members to community figures seeking to understand and prevent similar tragedies. In summary, the story of Margaret Ann Allen is a stark reminder of the complex paths that lead to extreme acts of violence. From a challenging childhood to brushes with law enforcement, from moments of genuine kindness to acts of devastating harm, her life encapsulates the duality of human behavior. The events of February 2005 and the subsequent trial reveal not only the details of one woman's actions, but also the broader societal and familial influences that contribute to crime. Through court records, testimonies, and media coverage, we gain a window into a case that is as tragic as it is instructive, offering lessons about the importance of support systems, the consequences of unchecked anger, and the enduring impact of personal and societal choices. Case 2. Wanda Jean Allen. Wanda Jean Allen was born on August 17, 1959 in Oklahoma, the second of 8 children in a family struggling with poverty and hardship. Her mother struggled with alcoholism, and her father left when the youngest child was born, leaving the family to survive on public assistance. Wanda's early years were marked by trauma. At the age of 12, she was hit by a truck and knocked unconscious, and in her mid-teens, she suffered a severe head injury from a stabbing. These injuries had a lasting effect on her cognitive abilities, and tests later revealed her IQ to be 69, indicating significant challenges in reasoning, comprehension, and emotional regulation. By age 17, she had dropped out of high school and begun a life marked by instability and brushes with the law. In 1981, Wanda Jean Allen was living with Dedra Pettis in Oklahoma City. The two women had a personal relationship, and on June 29th, a violent argument ended tragically when Allen shot Pettis. Allen later claimed it was an accidental shooting during a confrontation involving Pettis's boyfriend, but forensic evidence suggested the shooting occurred at close range and may have involved physical assault before the shot was fired. Regardless, prosecutors reached a plea deal with Allen, and she was convicted of manslaughter, serving just 2 years of a 4-year sentence. This early crime set the stage for a pattern of turbulent relationships and violent outcomes that would follow her throughout the decade. After her release, Allen met Gloria Jean Leathers in prison, and the two women formed a complex and sometimes volatile connection. Their relationship, which resumed outside prison walls, was marred by repeated conflicts. On December 2, 1988, tensions escalated in a dramatic and fatal confrontation. Leathers had called her mother to collect her from the residence she shared with Allen, intending to leave after ongoing disputes. They stopped at the village police department in northwest Oklahoma City to file a complaint. Witnesses say that Allen followed them to the station, approached Leathers, and fired a single gunshot into her abdomen. Leathers survived initially, but succumbed to her injuries on December 5, 1988. Her mother, Ruby Wilson, witnessed the shooting, and multiple law enforcement officers heard the shot, but no police employees directly saw it happen. The gun, a .38 caliber handgun, was recovered near the home. Wanda Jean Allen was arrested shortly afterward and charged with first-degree murder. The trial was controversial from the start. Evidence presented by the defense suggested Allen feared Leathers due to her violent tendencies, including a past incident where Leathers had reportedly harmed someone in self-defense. However, much of this testimony was excluded from the courtroom. Prosecutors portrayed Allen as a remorseless individual, pointing to her previous manslaughter conviction and her behavior in the 1988 shooting. The jury ultimately convicted her of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death. Throughout the legal proceedings, questions were raised about Allen's mental capacity and the adequacy of her representation. Her trial attorney, Robert Carpenter, was inexperienced in capital cases and had been paid a mere $800 to handle her defense. Critical evidence regarding her brain injury and cognitive limitations was not presented, and experts later noted that Allen suffered from sensory motor deficits and impairments likely linked to childhood trauma. Her mental health challenges sparked debate over the fairness of the trial and the death sentence. While on death row, Allen spent 12 years navigating appeals and seeking clemency. She became a born-again Christian, and her spiritual advisors noted her efforts to reconcile with her past and improve her public image in the hope of gaining mercy. Her case attracted national attention, including intervention by civil rights leaders like Reverend Jesse Jackson, who advocated for a stay of execution and questioned the state's handling of mentally vulnerable inmates. Demonstrations and vigils were held across Oklahoma, drawing attention to the complexities of the death penalty, particularly in cases involving women, minorities, and individuals with cognitive disabilities. Despite these efforts, clemency was denied and all appeals exhausted, including a last-minute request to the U.S. Supreme Court. On January 11, 2001, Wanda Jean Allen, then 41, was led into the execution chamber at Oklahoma State Penitentiary in McAllister. She was strapped to a gurney, addressed the room, and said, "Father, forgive them. They know not what they do." Witnesses observed her smiling at her attorneys and spiritual advisors before lethal drugs were administered. Allen's execution was notable as she became the first black woman executed in the United States since 1954 and only the sixth woman executed in the country since capital punishment resumed in 1977. Case 3. China P. Arnold. China Arnold, born on March 29, 1980 in Dayton, Ohio, is a woman whose life became infamous in her community and across the nation due to the shocking events surrounding the death of her infant daughter, Paris Talley. Known previously for legal troubles, including convictions for abduction and forgery, Arnold became the center of one of the most discussed criminal cases in Ohio in the mid-2000s. This is the story of her trials, the controversy surrounding her conviction, and the ultimate sentence that sent her to spend the rest of her life behind bars. In August 2005, Paris Talley was just 28 days old when tragedy struck. Reports indicate that the infant suffered fatal injuries at the hands of her caregiver, under circumstances that shocked neighbors, law enforcement, and medical professionals. According to authorities, Arnold had been involved in a dispute regarding the paternity of the child with her partner, Terrell Talley. DNA testing later confirmed that Terrell Talley was indeed the father. In the days following the incident, Arnold took Paris to the hospital where the baby was pronounced deceased. Medical examiners reported severe internal injuries that led to the infant's death. Initial investigations led to Arnold's arrest, though she was temporarily released due to insufficient evidence. The case would evolve over several years, eventually culminating in multiple trials and widespread media attention. The first trial faced immediate challenges when a surprise witness, a young child, claimed that another child had been responsible for the injuries. This testimony resulted in a mistrial, leaving the public and the courts searching for clarity. At the second trial, the prosecution presented additional evidence and testimony, including statements from Arnold's former cellmate, suggesting the events that led to Paris's death were intentional. The defense argued that evidence could implicate others present at the scene, and Arnold's impaired state due to alcohol consumption was cited as a mitigating factor. Despite these arguments, the jury found Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. The sentencing phase was complicated, as the jury considered the severity of the crime against possible mitigating circumstances. Ultimately, the jury recommended life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, sparing Arnold the death penalty, a decision that reflected the complexity of the case and the evidence presented. The legal process did not end there. In 2010, the Second District Court of Appeals reversed Arnold's conviction due to procedural concerns and the exclusion of material witnesses in her defense. This decision allowed Arnold a third trial, highlighting the challenges of balancing due process with the desire for justice in high-profile cases. During the third trial in 2011, prosecutors reiterated the events that led to Paris's death, presenting a timeline that included testimony from medical experts and investigators who detailed the circumstances of the infant's fatal injuries. Defense counsel continued to assert that the evidence was not definitive and that other factors could have contributed to the tragic outcome. After careful deliberation, the jury once again found Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. On May 20, 2011, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized the gravity of the offense, noting that the crime was deeply disturbing and had a profound impact on the community. Arnold's legal team indicated plans to pursue appeals, citing procedural and evidentiary concerns. Throughout the trials, the case drew significant attention from both the local community and national media. Advocates and family members argued for Arnold's innocence, while prosecutors and witnesses painted a picture of a premeditated and avoidable tragedy. Medical professionals involved in the case, including pathologists and emergency room physicians, described the extent of the injuries and provided insight into the cause of death, emphasizing the severity of the situation and the challenges in determining the precise sequence of events. The story of China Arnold serves as a case study in the complexities of the criminal justice system, particularly in cases involving young victims and disputed evidence. It highlights the difficulties prosecutors face in securing convictions, the role of defense attorneys in ensuring a fair trial, and the importance of appellate review when procedural errors may affect the outcome. Beyond the courtroom, the case sparked conversations about parental responsibility, the protection of children, and the ways communities respond to allegations of violence within the home. For those following the trial, the narrative was a mix of legal drama, investigative challenges, and emotional testimony from family members and community leaders. Despite the tragic nature of the events, the proceedings underscored the importance of due process and the careful consideration of evidence before determining guilt and sentencing. Today, China Arnold remains incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women, where she serves her life sentence. The story continues to be referenced in discussions about criminal justice, parental abuse cases, and the handling of high-profile trials involving children. While the legal system addressed the immediate question of accountability, questions surrounding prevention, warning signs, and support for families remain central to broader conversations about child welfare. In examining the case, it is clear that multiple factors, family dynamics, legal procedures, and investigative complexities, played a role in the outcome. The multi-trial process, appeals, and media coverage demonstrate the layered nature of criminal cases where the stakes are high, emotions run deep, and the evidence is scrutinized at every level. For viewers of true crime content, the case of China Arnold provides insight into the legal challenges associated with homicide cases involving infants, the intricate processes of trial and appeal, and the ongoing debates over justice, punishment, and rehabilitation. While the details are sobering, they serve to remind audiences of the seriousness with which the justice system treats allegations of violence against the most vulnerable. Case 4. Kiana Barker. The story of Kiana Barker is a chilling reminder of how fragile safety can be for children in foster care. Born on January 29, 1980, Barker would later become a foster mother in Florence, Los Angeles County, California, and her story became a headline for tragic reasons. In 2010, she was caring for a toddler named Viola Van Cleef, a little girl whose biological mother struggled with severe mental health issues and substance use, leaving Viola vulnerable from birth. Barker, who had 2 biological children of her own, was in the process of trying to adopt Viola when the unthinkable happened. On March 4, 2010, authorities reported that Viola had stopped breathing. Emergency responders rushed to the scene, but despite their efforts, the toddler was pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. Investigators later revealed that Viola had suffered extensive trauma, described in court as multiple repeated impacts causing fatal injuries. Witnesses later told police that Barker had been drinking heavily that evening and had entered Viola's room in a rage, which escalated to the child being severely injured. The investigation uncovered that Barker had been the subject of 5 previous complaints of child neglect or abuse, one of which was substantiated in 2002 when her own biological child had been seriously neglected. Barker's home environment was further complicated by her boyfriend, James DeWitt Julian, who had a criminal record including an armed robbery conviction from 1992, a fact that should have disqualified him from living in a foster-certified home. The circumstances raised questions about how Barker and Julian were ever approved to care for foster children. In the months following Viola's death, authorities meticulously reconstructed the events leading up to the tragedy, combining medical reports, witness statements, and forensic analysis. Barker initially claimed that Viola had become stuck in a bed frame and that she might have accidentally struck the child while attempting to free her. Investigators determined, however, that the injuries were consistent with deliberate, repeated force. The case also put a spotlight on United Care, the nonprofit agency that had placed Viola with Barker. United Care had been repeatedly cited for mismanagement, including previous cases where foster children had been left in unsafe conditions or subjected to excessive discipline. In 2007, a foster child drowned while unsupervised during a family event organized by the agency. The agency had also faced scrutiny over financial irregularities, with millions paid for childcare, but hundreds of thousands in questionable expenditures. Los Angeles County terminated its contract with United Care after Viola's death, and county officials began reviewing the licensing and oversight process for foster families. Barker was arrested on suspicion of murder and child abuse shortly after the incident. Julian, her boyfriend, was later charged as an accessory after the fact. Both faced significant legal consequences for their roles in Viola's death. Barker's trial culminated in a jury convicting her of second-degree murder, assault on a child causing death, and child abuse. In February 2014, she was sentenced to 25 years to life in state prison, a verdict that underscored the severity of the crime and the overwhelming evidence against her. Throughout the proceedings, prosecutors described Barker as a woman with a history of violent behavior toward children, citing incidents where she had disciplined her own child harshly. Her defense attorney argued that Barker had sought responsibility over Viola's care and that Julian had played a larger role in the child's injuries. Despite these claims, the evidence presented at trial painted a clear picture of responsibility and accountability for Barker. Viola's death also triggered wider reforms and reviews of child welfare practices in Los Angeles County, highlighting the critical need for proper vetting of foster parents and more rigorous monitoring of children in care. Her remains were later buried in an unmarked grave in Carson, California, leaving her family and the community mourning the loss of a life that was meant to be protected and nurtured. Viola's older sister, Sonia Van Cleef, spoke publicly about the tragedy, emphasizing the failure of the system to safeguard her sister and calling for justice for Viola. She highlighted the responsibility of the county and social workers who overlooked Barker's history and allowed her and Julian to be in a position of trust with vulnerable children. Case 5. Latonia Bellamy. On April 4, 2010, a young couple in Jersey City, New Jersey was celebrating a milestone in their lives, their engagement. Nia Hawk, 25, and Michael Mucciocchi, 27, had spent the evening surrounded by friends and family, laughing, dancing, and sharing moments that should have been remembered for years to come. They were full of life, hopeful for the future, and planning a wedding that was to take place the following year. What they couldn't know was that the night would end in a way that would shock their community and leave an indelible mark on everyone who knew them. That same night, 3 young people would set into motion a chain of events that would result in tragedy. One of them, Latonia Bellamy, only 19 at the time, would later be convicted of taking part in the deaths of the couple, a crime that prosecutors described as senseless and shocking. Bellamy would be sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, making her eligible for parole only in 2106. Latonia Bellamy, along with her cousin Shequin Bellamy and an accomplice named Darmelia Lawrence, became central figures in a case that drew intense media attention. The trio had been involved in a robbery earlier that year, and on that fateful night, they reportedly took a route that led them past the couple unloading gifts from their vehicle. According to court testimony, Shequin Bellamy confronted the couple, and a series of events unfolded that resulted in the fatal injuries of Hawk and Mucciocchi. Latonia Bellamy testified at trial that she had wanted to try firing a gun and that she followed her cousin and Lawrence out of fear for her own safety. She claimed she never intended to harm anyone, but evidence presented at trial showed that she did fire a gun at the scene. The trial revealed the stark contrast between the vibrant lives of the victims and the violent actions of the perpetrators. Nia Hawk was an associate producer for a television affiliate, and Michael Mucciocchi worked as a software engineer. Both had grown up in Jersey City, had made positive choices, and were known for their generosity and kindness. Family members and friends described them as bright, motivated, and full of promise. Their sudden deaths shocked the city, leaving loved ones grappling with grief and a sense of incomprehensible loss. They were exemplary young people, Michael's mother said at the sentencing hearing. One night that was stolen from them, from their families, from their friends. The impact of that is impossible to express. During the trial, Bellamy's defense focused on fear and coercion. She testified that she had been paralyzed by fear, worried about what her cousin might do if she refused to participate. She also admitted to taking part in the robbery in a minor way, accepting a small portion of proceeds from the incident. Cross-examination, however, highlighted inconsistencies in her statements. Prosecutors pointed out that she initially told investigators she had fired into the air and at the ground, but later admitted that her shots could have struck the victims. They argued that she was an active participant, that her actions directly contributed to the deaths, and that the crime was carried out with a degree of planning and intent. The sentencing hearing painted a vivid picture of the aftermath and the impact on the families. Judge Paul de Pascal described Bellamy's actions as extreme and senseless, noting her lack of impulse control and her capacity for violence. "If released, it is highly likely she will offend again," he said. The prosecutor stressed that there was no evidence of remorse, stating that the only result of her actions was the loss of 2 young lives. Family members spoke directly to the court, sharing their grief and the long-lasting consequences of the crime. Nia Hawk's uncle expressed the broader impact, highlighting that hundreds of people had their lives altered because of this event. Bellamy's own mother, Tiffany Bellamy, spoke about her daughter's character and the difficult circumstances that led to her involvement. She described Latonia as honest and caring, a young woman with aspirations of helping others through education and counseling. Tiffany expressed hope that the families of the victims could find healing, emphasizing that she understood their pain and wished for reconciliation where possible. The court proceedings revealed the complexity of human behavior, showing how fear, influence, and circumstance can intersect in tragic ways. The legal proceedings were also notable for the involvement of the other defendants. Darmelia Lawrence had pleaded guilty to armed robbery and agreed to testify against Shiquan Bellamy. The cousin, Shiquan, faced multiple murder charges related to this and other cases, highlighting a broader pattern of criminal behavior that extended beyond this single incident. Latonia Bellamy was the first to be tried, and her conviction set the stage for further trials involving her co-defendants. The jury deliberated for less than a full day before finding her guilty of murder, felony murder, robbery, carjacking, and weapons offenses. The case drew attention for the rapid pace of the trial, the emotional testimony, and the stark reality of how quickly lives can be altered by violence. Throughout the trial, the human element remained at the forefront. Witnesses described the victims' personalities, their ambitions, and the joy they brought to those around them. Friends recalled their smiles, their humor, and their ability to lift the spirits of anyone near them. The narrative of a promising young couple cut down in the prime of their lives created a deep resonance with the public, underscoring the fragility of life and the unpredictable consequences of criminal behavior. Courtroom observers and media coverage emphasized the contrast between the normal lives of the victims and the calculated actions of those accused, giving viewers and readers a clear sense of the gravity of the events. Latonia Bellamy's story, while legally settled, remains a cautionary tale about decisions, influence, and fear. It demonstrates how individuals can be swept into situations that have devastating outcomes and how the justice system seeks to address such actions. Her sentence ensures that she will spend the majority of her life in prison, reflecting both the severity of the crime and the need to protect the public from future harm. The victims' families continue to navigate their grief while advocating for justice and remembrance. Community members, prosecutors, and observers alike reflected on the lasting impact of the case, emphasizing the importance of vigilance, awareness, and the role of the legal system in addressing violent acts. This case continues to be studied as an example of the tragic consequences of thrill-seeking behavior, the influence of peer pressure, and the ripple effect of violence on communities. It highlights the human stories behind headlines, reminding us that behind every statistic is a life, a family, and a network of relationships that are forever altered. Nia Hawk and Michael Mucciocchi are remembered for their accomplishments, their relationships, and the joy they brought to their community. The events of April 4, 2010, serve as a somber reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of making choices that protect not only ourselves but those around us. Case 6. Lolita Barthel. On a late summer day in 1995, the quiet streets of Hillsborough County, Florida, witnessed a shocking turn of events that would forever change the life of one young woman and leave a family in mourning. Lolita Barthel, just weeks shy of her 18th birthday, became the center of a case that captured headlines and raised questions about youth, fear, and the path that leads someone to a tragic decision. The story begins not in a courtroom or a police station, but in the hallways of Tampa Bay Tech, where the ordinary routines of senior year students would collide with extraordinary consequences. On the second day of her final school year, Lolita found herself confronted not by classmates, but by law enforcement. Arrested in the principal's office, she was taken into custody, a scene that seemed almost surreal, yet would mark the start of a long and complicated journey. The events leading up to that moment began weeks before, when Lolita and two companions entered the home of Richard Menendez, a 64-year-old traveling floral supply salesman known for his quiet life and kind demeanor. According to accounts from one of her friends who later cooperated with authorities, the plan was to commit robbery, a desperate and reckless decision fueled by a mix of youthful daring and misjudged courage. Previous attempts had reportedly targeted older individuals without incident, but that day, the situation escalated in a way none of them anticipated. Confronted by Menendez, who reached for the weapon held by Lolita, the encounter turned violent. Reports indicate that in the heat of the moment, she discharged the firearm, ending the life of the man before her. While Lolita would later deny making threats, one friend recalled her words in the tense standoff. "Don't nobody put their hands on me. I'm going to smoke you." These words, whether spoken in fear or bravado, underscored the volatility of the situation and set the stage for a legal battle that would dominate her teen years. The aftermath was immediate and life-altering. Convicted of both robbery and homicide, Lolita faced the full weight of the justice system. Yet, she often describes her recollection of those courtroom moments as foggy, clouded by fear and confusion, to the point where she could not fully comprehend that the sentence handed down would be permanent, life in prison, without the possibility of release. It wasn't until she arrived at Jefferson Correctional Institution near Tallahassee that the reality truly sank in. Observing the older inmates who had been incarcerated since their teens and now approached their 70s, Lolita saw a mirror of what her future would hold. That's when it really hits you. Then you be like, "Well, that's me," she reflected, highlighting the stark contrast between youthful impulsivity and lifelong consequence. In the cold routine of prison life, moments of human connection and recognition of normalcy became rare but precious. One day, an older inmate noticed her staring and asked what had caught her attention. Lolita, overwhelmed, simply responded, "Don't take it personal, ma'am. I just can't believe it." This brief exchange illuminates the human side of a story often reduced to statistics in courtroom transcripts. A young woman grappling with the permanence of her choices while navigating an environment that few outside can imagine. At the time of her arrest, Lolita was just 17 years old, and by the time she entered prison, she was 19. In interviews years later, at age 23, she admitted that coping with her circumstances remains a daily challenge. She explained, "To me, I don't cope. You know how you can have an issue, but put it like in the back of your mind, or you block it out and you try to believe something totally different? That's what I do. That's what keeps my sanity." The story also touches on the life of her family, who were left to navigate the complex emotions that follow such a tragedy. Friends often asked her mother, Laretha Barthel, how she continued to endure the unimaginable. Her response was one of ongoing shock. "I think I'm still in shock. After all these years, I still don't believe it." Faith, hope, and routine became anchors in an otherwise disrupted life. Despite the constraints, Lolita and her mother found ways to maintain traditions, especially around the holidays. Before her incarceration, Lolita would purchase a watch for her mother each Christmas. Prison altered these gestures, but not the sentiment. In place of tangible gifts, she would comb through magazines, clip out pictures of watches, and mail them home, a symbolic way to preserve the connection and the ritual of giving. In 1999, a rare and deeply personal reunion occurred when Laretha visited her daughter in prison during the holiday season. Together, they shared a modest Christmas with dinner purchased from the prison canteen. Among the gifts exchanged, one stood out: an unopened pack of cigarettes, a seemingly small item that held profound significance in a context of restricted freedoms. In a poignant moment captured on film, mother and daughter posed in front of a prison Christmas tree. Dressed in standard prison blues, Lolita handed her mother an empty box, wrapped to resemble a present, a gesture that speaks volumes about resilience, memory, and the human desire to nurture bonds even under the most trying circumstances. Lolita's case also raises broader discussions about juvenile involvement in serious crimes and the justice system's handling of such cases. At 17, the threshold between adolescence and adulthood is a complex terrain. The decisions made during these formative years, coupled with social pressures and personal circumstances, can have irreversible consequences. Her story serves as a cautionary tale, illustrating how quickly youthful indiscretions can escalate into life-altering events. Within the prison walls, her experience is a mix of survival, reflection, and an ongoing attempt to reconcile her past actions with her present reality. Observing fellow inmates and engaging with the routines of incarceration provides a stark education in patience, perspective, and personal endurance. Yet, even amid the regimented life of prison, small acts of creativity and personal connection, like crafting a Christmas gift from a magazine, demonstrate the enduring human spirit. Family ties, even strained by circumstance, retain the power to shape emotional resilience and offer glimpses of hope. The narrative of Lolita Barthel is not merely about a crime. It is about a chain reaction of choices, the weight of accountability, and the intersection of youth and law. Each detail, from the day at Tampa Bay Tech to the solemn walls of Jefferson Correctional Institution, forms a timeline that reflects the complexities of human behavior, societal expectations, and the consequences that inevitably follow. Case 7. Mariel Bemis. In early 2014, a quiet suburban community in Stone Mountain, Georgia, was shaken by a heartbreaking event involving a young mother and her toddler daughter. Mariel Bemis, only 21 at the time, faced serious legal consequences after the tragic loss of her 3-year-old daughter, Layla. The events that unfolded over the weekend of February 23rd left neighbors, friends, and authorities searching for answers as to how such a young family could experience such turmoil. What started as a personal dispute quickly escalated into a crisis that would capture the attention of both local and national media. This is the story of a mother, a troubled relationship, and the devastating choices that changed lives forever. Mariel Bemis lived in the landmark at Mountain View Apartments with her daughter Layla. On February 23, 2014, an argument with her boyfriend, Troy Walker, set off a chain of events that would end in tragedy. According to reports from the authorities, tensions between Bemis and Walker escalated over text messages involving another woman, leading to a breakup. Walker left the apartment, hoping to give the situation some space, but a series of frantic calls from Bemis would soon bring him back to the home he had left just hours before. These calls would reveal the shocking truth. Layla was unresponsive, and emergency services were contacted immediately. Despite attempts to revive the child, she was pronounced deceased at a nearby hospital, leaving everyone involved in disbelief and grief. In court testimony, prosecutors outlined the series of decisions that led to Layla's death. The authorities reported that Bemis took the child from her bed and placed her in the bathroom, where she became unresponsive. Witnesses described the scene as deeply distressing, prompting the judge to ask some parents to remove their children from the courtroom during certain testimonies. The graphic details of the case were softened for the courtroom setting, but the seriousness of the situation was undeniable. Bemis later admitted to having difficulty coping with her emotions following the breakup, and she also attempted to harm herself during the same period. Her defense team noted that Bemis was adopted and had long struggled with feelings of rejection and the search for personal love and validation, adding another layer of complexity to the story. Neighbors and community members were shocked when news of the incident spread. Many commented on how loving Bemis appeared with her daughter just days before the tragedy. Social media profiles painted a picture of a young mother balancing her life, her studies in dance, and her role as a parent. Pictures of playful moments and family bonding sharply contrasted with the chaos that would unfold that weekend. People in the neighborhood and beyond expressed disbelief, wondering how someone who seemed so devoted could experience such a devastating breakdown. The local media covered the story extensively, highlighting the emotional toll on those left behind and the deep questions about mental health, emotional stress, and family dynamics. Legal proceedings moved swiftly. Bemis faced charges related to the loss of her child and entered a guilty plea, acknowledging her responsibility in the events that led to Layla's passing. During sentencing, the assistant district attorney remarked on the incomprehensible nature of the situation, emphasizing that while the sentence could not reverse the tragedy, accountability was being established through the legal process. On September 11, 2014, Mariel Bemis received a life sentence, ensuring that she would remain in custody for the remainder of her life. This resolution provided a measure of closure for the legal system in the community, even if it could never undo the pain suffered by those affected. The case also raised questions about the role of personal relationships in moments of crisis. Prosecutors highlighted that text messages from another woman played a significant role in the events leading up to the tragedy. Bemis's repeated attempts to reach her boyfriend, followed by the ultimate confrontation, demonstrated how heightened emotions can escalate into irreversible actions. Experts in the courtroom noted the importance of mental health support, emphasizing that individuals experiencing emotional distress must have access to resources to prevent similar incidents. While this case was particularly shocking due to the involvement of such a young child, it also underscored broader societal challenges, including the pressures faced by young parents and the potential consequences of untreated emotional difficulties. Community reaction was mixed. Some people expressed sympathy for Bemis, considering her youth and emotional struggles, while others were focused on the loss of an innocent life. Witnesses described feeling shaken by the details, noting that what happened was both tragic and difficult to understand. Conversations in local forums and media outlets highlighted the delicate balance between accountability and compassion, with many acknowledging the need for awareness about mental health, parenting stress, and relationship conflicts. Bemis's story, though devastating, served as a reminder of the human factors behind legal cases and the importance of recognizing warning signs before situations escalate beyond control. From a procedural standpoint, the case demonstrated the efficiency of the legal system in addressing serious incidents. After her arrest on the same day as the event, Bemis was charged and brought before the court for initial hearings. The legal team carefully examined evidence, including witness statements, text message records, and social media posts, to build a complete understanding of the circumstances. The court proceedings maintained a professional tone, balancing the need for transparency with sensitivity toward the community and surviving family members. Through the courtroom process, both the prosecution and defense were able to present their perspectives, highlighting factors that contributed to the tragic outcome. Case 8. Willa Glendora Blanc. Willa Glendora Blanc, also known as Corvette Girl, became one of the most notorious figures in Kentucky's recent criminal history, not just for her actions, but for the shocking audacity behind them. Born on June 19, 1961, Blanc's life took a dark turn that would forever etch her name into the annals of true crime. At the heart of this story is Walter Sartori, a 73-year-old reclusive millionaire whose trust in the wrong person led to his untimely disappearance and tragic end. The story begins in Hebron, Kentucky, a quiet town where Sartori had relocated to live a life of seclusion driven by years of social anxiety and paranoid thoughts. Sartori, a retired scientist with a brilliant mind and a fortune amassed through decades of careful investments and Wall Street savvy, had suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, making him wary of strangers and deeply distrustful of anyone who approached him. In 2008, Willa Blanc entered Sartori's orbit, initially as a cleaner for a neighbor's house. She seemed unassuming, but over time, she maneuvered herself into a position of influence over the elderly man, exploiting his isolation and the fragile nature of his social connections. Blanc's methods were subtle at first. Sartori, despite his brilliant intellect, noticed the unusual attention. He reportedly expressed to friends that Blanc had overstayed her welcome, entering his home without his invitation, lingering far longer than necessary. In an attempt to protect himself, Sartori even changed his locks, worried that Blanc might have duplicated his key. Despite these precautions, Blanc's manipulation continued. By February 2009, investigators believed that Sartori had been lured into Blanc's home under the guise of casual visits, only to be held captive in her basement. While reports differ on the exact methods used, it is widely agreed that Sartori was restrained, and within a week, He had passed away under circumstances that were suspicious and tragic. The aftermath was chilling. Blanc, together with her son, Louis Wilkinson, transported Sartori's remains to a location in Indiana. They reportedly claimed they were handling a deceased pet, masking the reality of the situation from those around them. Investigators would later uncover that Blanc had begun accessing Sartori's accounts even before his death, exploiting her position to siphon funds and secure her financial gain. The scale of the deception was staggering. Blanc forged documents, giving herself legal authority over Sartori's assets, and transferred substantial sums from his accounts. Estimates suggest she accessed more than $200,000 directly and had access to accounts with over $1 million, all while Sartori's friends were unaware of the situation. Sartori's friends from online bulletin boards, communities formed around shared interests and mutual support, were among the first to notice his absence. Elizabeth Kearley, a longtime acquaintance who had met Sartori online 16 years prior, described how close their bond had become. For Sartori, whose family was distant and non-existent in his life, these online connections were his surrogate family. When he stopped communicating, they alerted authorities, hoping he might still be found alive. By March 2009, the grim reality had come to light. Authorities discovered Sartori's remains in Indiana, revealing that he'd been restrained and passed away while in Blanc's custody. The legal consequences were swift. Blanc, by then 50 years old, faced charges that could have resulted in the death penalty, a reflection of the severity of her actions under Kentucky law. Instead, she struck a plea deal, agreeing to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Her son Wilkinson was also charged, and his trial would follow separately, complicated by issues surrounding his competence and level of involvement. Court proceedings revealed more about Blanc's character and the disturbing motivations behind the crime. Prosecutors described her as lacking remorse, highlighting her pride and her justification for her actions in her own mind. Even in the courtroom, she remained calm, detached from the gravity of the situation, which only intensified the public's fascination with the case. Witnesses and friends of Sartori painted a picture of a man whose life had been carefully structured to avoid harm. Despite his mental health challenges, he had been steadily connecting with others, slowly expanding his support network. That fragile trust, however, had been exploited with devastating consequences. The investigation also revealed the planning and calculated nature of Blanc's actions. She and Wilkinson had rented vehicles, prepared for the transport of the body, and taken steps to obscure their movements. Authorities found evidence of her intentions to manipulate Sartori's finances, including forged legal documents, as well as materials suggesting she had studied methods for targeting vulnerable individuals. Public reaction to the case was intense. The story of a brilliant, isolated scientist, betrayed by someone he trusted, struck a chord nationally. Comparisons to the film A Beautiful Mind highlighted the tragic dimensions of Sartori's life, an intelligent, socially isolated man whose fears of the outside world were all too real. The narrative became one not just of crime, but of caution, illustrating how vulnerability can be exploited and how greed can override morality. Sartori's financial portfolio, which had taken decades to build, became a central focus of the trial. Transfers totaling hundreds of thousands of dollars, coupled with access to larger accounts, underscored the motive behind Blanc's actions. Prosecutors emphasized that the crime was driven by avarice, illustrating how the pursuit of wealth can lead to the most extreme violations of trust and human decency. As the case unfolded, details of Sartori's eccentric and meticulous life emerged. He had filled his home with advanced computing systems, engaged in complex statistical analyses, and even pursued research in extraterrestrial life. These details, combined with his mental health struggles, painted a portrait of a man both brilliant and tragically isolated. The mother and son duo of Blanc and Wilkinson faced a courtroom narrative that blended horror with the banality of greed. Blanc's personal life, including her gambling habits and flashy lifestyle, became part of the public record, contrasting starkly with Sartori's reclusive and careful existence. Ultimately, the sentence imposed on Blanc reflected the judicial system's view of her actions: life imprisonment without parole, a stark warning of the consequences of premeditated exploitation and deceit. The case also raised broader questions about vulnerability, social isolation, and the responsibilities of those in positions of trust. It highlighted how even individuals with brilliant minds and considerable resources can be endangered by those who manipulate weaknesses for personal gain. Sartori's friends and supporters emphasized the human dimension behind the headlines. Beyond the financial losses and legal proceedings, they mourned the man whose life had been cut short, whose isolation had been exploited, and whose kindness had been betrayed. Case 9. Dorothea Demetrius Bynum. The story of Tiffany Long's tragic death is one that shook the small community of Burlington, North Carolina to its core, and left questions about trust, youth, and the fragility of life lingering long after the events unfolded. Tiffany, a bright and lively 10-year-old girl, lived with her grandmother Nancy Long and her siblings in a quiet neighborhood. Her life, filled with school, friends, and family, would come to a devastating and sudden end in October 1998. On the afternoon of October 16th, Tiffany received permission from her grandmother to visit a friend in the neighborhood. She left the house around 3:30 p.m., cheerful and unaware of the danger that awaited her. Hours later, when her grandmother returned home, Tiffany was nowhere to be found. A sense of urgency gripped the community as Nancy Long began a frantic search, contacting neighbors and local authorities, desperate to find her granddaughter safe. The police were called around 8 p.m., and an intensive search commenced immediately. Officers combed the neighborhood, questioned residents, and canvassed the area for hours. Early on October 17th, investigators traced Tiffany's last known movements to 614 Lakeside Avenue, a house that had once been home to 3 teenagers she knew: Harold Jones, age 16, his nephew Joseph Jones, 13, and Harold's girlfriend Dorothea Bynum, 17. These teenagers were familiar faces in the neighborhood, and Tiffany had interacted with them during church and local gatherings. What unfolded next would become one of the most notorious cases in Alamance County history. Around 5 a.m. on October 17th, police discovered Tiffany's body behind a vacant house at the Lakeside Avenue address. She had been subjected to extreme violence, and investigators immediately began piecing together the events leading to her death. The crime scene revealed a trail of blood, drag marks, and signs of a struggle. A metal bed rail was identified as a key object in the assault, and further evidence pointed toward the involvement of all 3 teens. In the immediate aftermath, all 3 teenagers were taken into custody and charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and other serious offenses. Dorothea Bynum, facing the most severe consequences due to her age and involvement, agreed to a plea bargain, pleading guilty to second-degree murder along with additional charges, and was sentenced on February 14, 2000, to a minimum of 124 years in prison. Her plea allowed prosecutors to pursue trials against Harold and Joseph Jones, both of whom were later convicted of first-degree murder and received life sentences. The investigation revealed the chilling details of what occurred that day. Tiffany had been lured to the house by those she trusted. Once inside, she was held against her will, and the teenagers' plan, initially described as a way to frighten or teach her a lesson, spiraled into a violent encounter. Court documents and the medical examiner's report described the severity of Tiffany's injuries, including head trauma and bruising from blunt force impacts, as well as signs of physical assault. While the media coverage highlighted the shocking nature of the crime, certain details were often misreported or exaggerated in local rumors. The autopsy clarified the true extent of Tiffany's injuries, correcting myths about mutilation or the use of improvised objects beyond what was verified. The thorough investigation involved numerous pieces of evidence, including Tiffany's personal belongings found at the scene, clothing, and traces of physical contact linking the suspects to the crime. Witnesses placed the teenagers with Tiffany shortly before her disappearance, corroborating the timeline established by the authorities. During court proceedings, the legal system navigated complex issues, including the ages of the defendants, plea agreements, and potential capital punishment. Bynum's plea agreement included her cooperation in testifying against the other teenagers, ensuring the prosecution could secure convictions. Her sentencing reflected both the severity of the crime and the plea arrangement, emphasizing that her freedom would be unlikely without extraordinary intervention, such as a gubernatorial pardon. The trials of Harold and Joseph Jones highlighted the legal intricacies of trying minors for violent offenses and the media attention surrounding such cases. Separate trials were held, and both teens were ultimately found guilty of first-degree murder, with sentences designed to keep them incarcerated for the remainder of their lives. The case also raised discussions in the community about juvenile justice, accountability, and the factors that lead young individuals to commit violent acts. Local authorities, including the district attorney and law enforcement, emphasized the unprecedented nature of the crime in Alamance County, stressing that it was not the work of a stranger but of acquaintances, making it even more unsettling for residents. The community grappled with grief, fear, and the desire for answers. Tiffany's family, particularly her grandmother Nancy Long, faced an unimaginable loss while navigating the legal process and dealing with media attention. Despite her sorrow, Nancy Long made public statements urging respect for the family's privacy and remembering Tiffany as a joyful and loving child. The aftermath of the tragedy also brought to light issues related to juvenile mental health and legal representation. Relatives of the teens noted concerns about cognitive abilities and potential pressure during interrogations, though the court ultimately determined the teenagers were responsible for their actions. Media coverage often reflected local and national biases, with certain elements emphasized or misconstrued, highlighting the importance of accurate reporting and careful interpretation of evidence. Over time, the case has been examined in legal studies, criminology courses, and true crime discussions, illustrating both the procedural and societal implications of youth-involved violent crimes. The timeline of events, from Tiffany's last moments alive to the resolution of trials, provides a detailed view of the investigative process, legal challenges, and judicial outcomes. Each step, from the initial disappearance report to the recovery of the body, collection of evidence, interviews, and court proceedings, paints a comprehensive picture of how law enforcement and the legal system respond to complex cases. Key moments, such as the discovery of Tiffany's backpack, the analysis of clothing and DNA evidence, and the testimony of crime scene investigators, underscore the meticulous work required to secure justice. The case also reflects broader societal questions about community safety, the role of peers in influencing behavior, and the impact of early interventions in preventing escalation to violent acts. Tiffany's story, while deeply tragic, serves as a reminder of the vulnerability of children and the importance of vigilance, awareness, and community engagement. Beyond the courtroom and evidence, the human element of loss and grief resonates throughout the narrative. The Long family's journey through sorrow, the teenagers' experiences navigating legal responsibility, and the community's reaction offer lessons about resilience, accountability, and the complexity of human behavior. In examining the legal outcomes, Bynum's plea and lengthy sentence highlight how plea agreements can shape the path of justice, balancing cooperation with punishment. Harold and Joseph Jones's convictions underscore the seriousness with which the courts treat juvenile perpetrated violent offenses, especially when the community demands closure and safety assurances. Even years later, the case continues to be referenced in discussions about juvenile crime, the limits of punishment, and the role of mental health assessments in determining culpability. The story of Tiffany Long is more than a record of a crime. It is a case study in law enforcement, community response, legal strategy, and the enduring impact of violence on families and neighborhoods. By understanding the chronological events, evidence, and judicial proceedings, audiences can gain insight into the mechanics of criminal investigations, the responsibilities of the legal system, and the enduring need for community awareness and child protection. Case 10. Ana Maria Cardona. In the late days of October 1990, a tragedy unfolded on the sunny streets of Miami, Florida, that would shock the community and haunt investigators for decades. The small, lifeless body of a 3-year-old boy was discovered abandoned near a mansion in Miami Beach. The child, who had not yet been identified, wore a tiny t-shirt covered in colorful lollipops. The media quickly labeled him Baby Lollipops, and the nickname stuck, symbolizing the innocence lost in the horrific circumstances surrounding his death. This case would become infamous not only because of the brutality involved, but also due to the complex and controversial trial that followed. The child, Lázaro Figueroa, was severely undernourished and bore injuries that indicated long-term mistreatment. Investigators noted that his body showed signs of repeated physical trauma, including a bent arm, fractured bones, and torn tissue around his mouth and gums. The autopsy revealed extensive malnutrition and neglect, alongside evidence that he had been restrained and possibly burned. The sheer magnitude of his suffering left little doubt that the child had endured ongoing abuse over months, if not years. Yet, as shocking as the evidence was, the trial that followed would weave a complicated narrative around the adults in his life, raising questions of accountability, coercion, and the intersection of personal struggles with criminal acts. Ana Maria Cardona, a 30-year-old Cuban immigrant, was arrested in December 1990 in connection with the child's death. Alongside her was Olivia Gonzalez, Cardona's partner, who would later become a key witness against her. The charges were severe: first-degree murder and aggravated child abuse, carrying the possibility of the death penalty. The prosecution painted Cardona as the primary caregiver who allowed the boy's suffering to continue unchecked, ultimately culminating in his fatal injuries from blunt force trauma caused by a baseball bat. From the outset, Cardona maintained her innocence regarding direct responsibility. She claimed that Gonzalez had been physically abusive toward Lázaro and that she, consumed by fear and her own struggles, was unable to intervene. Cardona's defense highlighted her turbulent childhood in Cuba and the psychological toll of personal losses, including the death of the child's father. The defense also emphasized her cocaine use as a mechanism for coping with overwhelming stress and fear, painting a portrait of a troubled mother caught in an impossible situation. Gonzalez, who had admitted to assisting in restraining and physically punishing Lázaro, testified against Cardona in exchange for a reduced sentence of 40 years for second-degree harm. Gonzalez's testimony was crucial, providing a detailed account of the abuse, which the prosecution argued directly implicated Cardona in the child's death. The courtroom heard about the prolonged period of suffering endured by Lázaro, from malnourishment to repeated beatings, and the evidence was unflinching in its presentation. The presiding judge noted that the duration and intensity of the abuse set this case apart from others in the history of Miami-Dade County, emphasizing the exceptional cruelty involved. Throughout the trial, the media spotlighted Cardona's identity as the child's mother, intensifying public outrage. The community grappled with the notion that a parent could be at the center of such cruelty. Observers speculated that Cardona's relationship with a woman may have amplified sensationalized coverage, though there was no concrete evidence that her sexual orientation influenced the legal outcome. In April 1992, Cardona was sentenced to death, making her the first woman in Florida to receive capital punishment for the death of her own child. Over the following years, Cardona's conviction would face multiple appeals. The Florida Supreme Court ultimately overturned her initial sentence, citing procedural errors, including the prosecution's failure to disclose interviews with Gonzalez that contained contradictory statements. A new trial was scheduled, but delays extended the process over a decade. By the time her retrial occurred, the case had already become one of the most notorious in Florida's criminal history. The retrial brought forth additional complexities. The defense suggested that Lázaro may have been left in the care of a 14-year-old girl with cognitive challenges who initially confessed but later recanted. Cardona's attorneys argued that police had pressured both Cardona and the young girl into providing statements that were inconsistent or potentially false. They also presented evidence of Cardona's reformed behavior while incarcerated, highlighting her role as a model inmate, her devout faith, and her efforts to maintain contact with her surviving children, Juan and Taimi, who themselves faced personal struggles. Despite these efforts, the evidence presented by the prosecution was overwhelming. Medical testimony detailed the severity of Lázaro's injuries, including missing teeth, torn tissue in the mouth, bent limbs, and extensive malnourishment. Experts described the child's life as one of constant pain, where even simple acts like eating or moving caused distress. Photographs and autopsy reports illustrated the horrifying condition in which Lazaro had lived, and prosecutors emphasized the sustained nature of the abuse, arguing that Cardona had full awareness of his suffering. The jury deliberated for nearly a day and a half in Cardona's retrial. They examined the accounts of witnesses, the autopsy reports, and Cardona's own statements. Despite some arguments pointing to potential coercion and alternative explanations, the jury ultimately found Cardona guilty of first-degree homicide and aggravated abuse. The recommendation was again the death penalty. Judge Reimberto Diaz, presiding over the case, noted the overwhelming weight of aggravating factors in justifying the sentence, stressing that Lazaro's entire short life had been marked by suffering and neglect. Throughout the proceedings, Cardona's demeanor fluctuated. She reportedly wept when the sentence was handed down, a poignant reminder of the human complexities that often accompany high-profile criminal cases. Gonzalez, having served roughly half of her reduced sentence, had long been released, while Cardona returned to death row as the legal system navigated the difficult balance between procedural fairness and societal outrage. Thank you for watching until the end. If you found this video interesting or informative, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories. Your support really helps the channel grow and allows me to keep bringing you carefully researched cases. Let me know in the comments which case stayed with you the most. See you in the next video.